That's actually what
Um,
got me into the climate crisis, was a health crisis with my father, actually.
Well, let's start there. Maybe we could start there. I mean, I've read a little bit about your story, but I would love to know more about that. I'm always fascinated when I meet people in the climate space, particularly people like yourself who've dedicated so much to it. What was your wake up moment to the climate crisis, and what led you to feel like you needed to get involved?
So my wake up was losing my father to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a really aggressive cancer. And if you think about what we're going through with the climate crisis and biodiversity loss, it's like we're at stage 4 cancer. And we can obliterate the stage 4 cancer with chemotherapy or radiation, but that's not really a holistic approach. Like carbon capturing technologies don't impact all of the different aspects of the climate crisis. They're just dealing with one facet of it. So losing my father really made it clear to me that we're exposed on a daily basis to so many carcinogens in our environment. And I read a book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carlson. It was a pivotal book for me. And I do think just with the water we drink, the air we breathe, all the different toxins in the environment, the plastics, the microplastics we're consuming, that the rate, even though we have technology and access to clean, organic, fresh, local produce, we're still being poisoned because we're destroying and degrading the planet. And so until we recognize that respecting and honoring Mother Earth is the only way to get out of these crises, then we're going to continue to see increased rates of disease, like my father dying to cancer, and we're going to continue to see the destruction and future pandemics. So we're really living in unprecedented, scary times. But yeah, that was my wake up moment of, oh my gosh, like how we treat the environment directly impacts our health.
Yeah, and what a sort of profound way to learn that lesson. And I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your father. I think I read that you were 22. I mean, it's always hard to lose a loved one, but particularly at that age, I imagine it was incredibly difficult. And I would love to understand more about what that journey was like of dealing with that loss and then making that link to the environment and to the climate. You mentioned there Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Was that the big turning point? Were there a few things that you read? What were the key pivotal moments in you kind of drawing the link between those two big themes?
So I like to read a lot of books. So I read Rachel Carlson. Then I read Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, which
Great
turned
book.
me vegan for a while, but then I became anemic. I just was appalled with industrial farming and agriculture, especially how we treat animals. And so, yeah, Jonathan Safran Foer's book Eating Animals was also a pivotal book for me. So I just started picking up these books. Then fast forward, I read David Wallace Wells' Uninhabitable Earth, but the column that was featured in the New Yorker, and that scared the crap out of me, to be honest. I'm like, oh my God. Like the climate crisis is not a 100, 200 year out thing. And at the time, I'd just seen Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, and I knew it was a problem, but I didn't realize how quickly the climate crisis was occurring. So I think that from a time scale, sense of urgency standpoint, David Wallace Wells' article and then his book, Reading Uninhabitable Earth, really kind of lit a fire under my butt. And then I also read another book called Earth by Bill McKibben. And I just started reading all about the science of the climate crisis. And the more I read, to be honest, the more depressed and hopeless I got. And so I went through a bit of a dark period after the 2017 fires hit my community. It was like the apocalypse out here in California, like $9 billion worth of damage. And I just remember driving down the freeway and the hospital's on fire. Like there's a narrow corridor on the freeway of fire on each side. And I just drove right through it and just recognizing, wow, like we are really in some really dire times. So after reading that book by Bill McKibben and David Wallace Wells and then experiencing the wildfires out here, I just had a bit of an emotional crisis. I got depressed, I got anxious, I had what psychologists are now coining the term as eco-anxiety, eco-despair, but I didn't know what the term was for it back then. And so I spent time actually in Kauai healing because my family has a home out there, surrounding myself with healers and some Native Hawaiians, and just like getting my spirit back about not feeling so doom and gloom, like, oh, we're all gonna die. Like changing my thoughts and becoming more spiritual and grounded. And then at that same time, I was reading a book called Drawdown, 100 Solutions to Reverse Climate Change. And then I met and befriended the author, Paul Hawken, and he started mentoring me. And then I met the co-author, Chad Frischman, and I just started meeting all the Drawdown people behind that book. And so solutions got on my radar, and I was starting to heal spiritually and emotionally and psychologically. So at the same time that I was healing from this pit of despair and depression about the climate crisis, I was also starting to learn about climate solutions. So that I haven't looked back, and I haven't hit that low point since 2017. But fast forward to 2019, I actually lost my home in the fire. So I had already started getting into climate solutions, and then I survived the Kincaid fire, but at that time I already had a strong meditation practice, and so that really kept me grounded. Learning to meditate and sticking with it helped me through some really challenging times, especially losing my home to the Kincaid fire, which was a fire that happened 2 years after the Tubbs fire.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, wow. So I want to jump back a little bit because you talked there at the start about reading those books, and I've read many of those same books as well and can relate on a really deep level to that feeling of sort of overwhelm, depression, anxiety, sense of paralysis. Feels like the ground has sort of been pulled from beneath your feet where you suddenly realize the scale of this issue. And I think for many people, the challenge with communicating this issue is that it feels far away and it feels intangible and it's hard to understand. But you've also talked there about your firsthand experience of being on a literal front line of the climate change and ultimately losing your home to extreme weather. Can you tell me a little bit more about that experience and how that impacted the way that you perceive the climate crisis?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think we take things for granted, like breathing oxygen every day, which we get from phytoplankton in the oceans, and also a lot of beautiful carbon sinks like the Amazon help supply our oxygen as well. But we really take for granted things that make us human, like breathing. And I think during both the Tubbs and Kincaid fire, my breathing was really compromised, and I remember walking outside and it was raining ash, and just to breathe fresh air, I've never felt more grateful for a breath than when I drove down to the Bay Area and could finally breathe and take a deeper breath, because it felt like I was suffocating with all the ash and the smoke. And so when your breathing is so severely compromised, it makes you more empathic for those that deal with air pollution on a daily basis in other areas of the planet, because I experienced basically worse air quality than Beijing, China during the Kincaid and Tubbs fire. So yeah, it really changed my perspective on things that allow us to be human and live on this planet, and help us become alive, fully functioning humans, like breathing and oxygen. So I'm very grateful that we can all breathe.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate the small things in life that we take for granted, I suppose, when the very kind of like necessities of life are taken from you, like the place that you call home. So you read this information, you had this sort of dark night of the soul. Lots of people, kind of talk about learning about climate like that, and it's almost like a processing of grief, and that's something that you're familiar with in your life, and then you've lost your home. How do you get from that place of I imagine despair, depression, paralysis, to a place of action and taking action? Like, what does that journey look like?
I honestly would credit transcendental meditation to healing me, and keeping me grounded and growing and ascending as a person and a soul, and working and being able to work in this space, because I have experienced paralysis. But by having that self-care of meditating every day, it keeps me basically grounded and optimistic. Someone just recently told me a quote that really resonated with me around optimism. The optimism is action with your sleeves rolled up. So it for me, taking that spirit of no, we can do this. We have all the solutions. That spirit, that can do spirit, we have no choice. Like if we just succumb to apathy and inaction, like we're all screwed. And I also have younger nephews and a niece, and they're all under the ages of 7. And so I'm really fighting for their future as well as my own and our generation's future, because even our future is compromised in the next 20, 30 years. But what keeps me hopeful is we do actually have all the solutions. They've been laid out in the book Drawdown, and there are so many people studying this that if we just deploy specific solutions across all sectors of society, and protect critical carbon sinks, that we can actually mitigate the worst impacts of the climate emergency. But for some reason, as a species, we just want to continue business as usual and actually not get to work. So I think we will hit this pivotal point where there will be such severe climate collapse all around the world, and we'll have no option but to act. But I hope that we can build a community of like-minded spirits that are dedicated to the solution, so that our landing isn't like a crash landing, but it's more of a soft landing.
Yeah, totally. And I guess we have to hope that it doesn't take losing your home, for example, and this thing being on our doorstep for people to wake up and to take action, right? At that point, as we know, it's too late. And I think that's what many people in the climate space have been trying to do for years, is to kind of sound the alarm, to shout, like scientists have been shouting from the rooftop. And the challenge is how we can communicate it more effectively. And you talked there about hope, and I often feel like you need a sort of active hope in the climate space. Like it's not enough just to hope that we'll fix this and it'll be okay. It's like that rolling up your sleeves and like, well, if I'm not going to do it, who else is, right? So it's about getting stuck in. And you're someone who's very much done that. And you talked there about transcendental meditation helping you feel grounded, and I know that is in itself the name of the organization that you have founded. So I would like, maybe we use that as a bit of a segue. I would love to learn more about your organization and what it does, and perhaps first what inspired you to create it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Drawdown actually inspired me to create Grounded, seeing that there are solutions. And my family actually is in the wine business, and I worked in my family business right before leaving the family business to fully work on the climate crisis. I mean, I still do some work in the family business, but I'd say the lion's share of my work is environmental activism and solutions activation, specifically solutions. So yeah, I was working in my family business, Jackson Family Wines, and always grew up with a deep love of the soil. And of course, wine comes from the earth. And so as vintners, we have a deep love and respect for the land and feel like stewards of the land. So really, that was already ingrained as an ethos in me by my father growing up, is how do you take care for the land? How do you care for vineyards? How do you care for the land and biodiversity around the vineyards? And then creating Grounded, my organization, was inspired by reading the book Drawdown and having the dark night of the soul of climate despair and eco-anxiety, and then recognizing, okay, there are all these solutions, and then also recognizing that I've been born with privilege as someone that has philanthropic capital. Not that I have a ton of philanthropic capital, because a lot of the assets are in wineries and vineyards and the land, but the liquid assets that I did have, I started actually donating to specific climate solutions. So instead of donating to like large environmental NGOs, I wanted to create Grounded that was really grant making to specific solutions to solving the climate crisis, whether it be solving for rapidly thawing permafrost, and creating scientific analysis around permafrost, which is not really talked about, which is part of the Arctic zone, or giving a seed grant to Amazon Frontlines and my friend Amante Nemkimo to protect and conserve the Amazon. So I found these smaller climate solutionists that were really on the front lines And I support a lot of Indigenous frontline organizations as well and communities because, first of all, this statistic really scared me. Less than 2% of all philanthropic giving goes to the environment. And then of all the climate giving, less than 1% goes to Indigenous communities. Yet Indigenous communities are stewarding 80% of our Earth's biodiversity. And so we really need money and resources going into the hands of our Earth's caretakers and guardians. And so that was a wake-up call for me in terms of my own climate philanthropy. Where can I have impact where no one else is really investing? And I saw a huge, I don't like the word opportunity, but just I wanted to be of service and I wanted to learn as well versus going in and saying, how can I help you more? How can I learn from you? What do you need in your communities? And listening and learning and having Indigenous mentors like my friend Mindahi Bastida, who is my friend Shie Bastida's father, has been a huge mentor of mine. He's a Tomi Toltec. So I started having these Indigenous mentors around how do you care for the earth and seeing climate solutions not just from a technological standpoint, but also from an ecosystem protection of critical carbon sinks and different ethos and spiritual way of being on the earth standpoint. And then I created Grounded, which is an organization that grant makes to climate solutions, and we focus on 3 different areas. One, mitigating further emissions. So we're partnered with the Department of Energy in the United States around clean energy transition, clean energy jobs. So we're working on a campaign for that in blue and red states with a coalition of other organizations. So 1, stopping further emissions. 2, drawing down existing carbon from the atmosphere, focused on earth-based solutions. So even though I recognize carbon capturing technologies are critically important, I'm not worried about money going to those technologies. I'm more worried about money going to preventing and protecting our Earth's ecosystems, our rivers, our ocean, all the wetlands, the peatlands, the forests, the old growth forests. I'm focused more on that aspect of drawing down carbon. And then 3rd, legislative and policy reform. So we've stopped a huge oil and gas lease sale, 257 off of the Gulf of Mexico and Texas, which would have been the largest oil and gas lease sale in U.S. history, 80 million acres. So we took a stance and we're pretty vocal about that and pressured the U.S. government to not go through with that. And I actually received some not so favorable emails from people taking that stance, but that didn't stop me. And so, yes, stepping up against the oil and gas industry is one way of going about legislation, but I'm also focused on stopping Ecocide. So I'm the U.S. Chair for Stop Ecocide International, and I'm the U.S. counterpart for Jojo Mehta, who's my friend that runs Stop Ecocide International. So focusing on criminalizing ecocide as the 5th crime against peace in the International Criminal Court, and making sure that as many U.S. people learn about the term ecocide. What is ecocide? Why should you care about ecocide? So yeah, it's been an honor and privilege to work alongside Jojo Mehta and learn from her and be her U.S. counterpart.
I also know Jojo, and I'm a huge fan of hers. Actually, I keep trying to find a way for Earthrise to work with Jojo to do some big explainer around Ecocide, and I think that you've prompted me to kind of put that back at the top of my to-do list. But wow, so there's so much to unpack there, and thank you for describing your organization and so beautifully. I think it's so powerful to be funding climate solutions, and by the sounds of it, you're really focusing on nature-based climate solutions, which is so incredibly important. And one thing I really liked about looking at your website is this really quite like simple and direct framework of cutting emissions, drawing down existing carbon, and then this idea of like policy reform and specifically focusing on recognizing the rights of nature. And I'd love to dig into that in more detail. But before we get into that, you know, you mentioned also there a few really powerful Indigenous leaders and people that we've had a chance to work with at Earthrise, and people I'm a huge fan of. And this is such an important piece when it comes to climate and environment, and one that feels like it's only just starting to get recognition. So could you expand a little bit on why Indigenous communities are important when it comes to the fight for protecting nature? And one fact you said there, which always just blows my mind, is this idea or the reality that Indigenous communities protect 80% of biodiversity, yet they represent 2% of the world's population. I think is the stat, but I may be wrong. That's something. No, 4%. 5%. Chloe, my producer, looked at me and was like, no. 5% of the world's population protecting 80%. Still an absolutely mind-blowing statistic. So could you just, maybe elaborate on that a little bit and why Indigenous communities are so important in this fight?
Absolutely. It's an honor to be working alongside Mendahi Bastida, who is Shie Bastida's father, and he is with a group of the Council of the Eagle and Condor. So it's in the prophecy of Indigenous communities right now that Indigenous communities from around the world will gather to save Mother Earth. And so if you ask any Indigenous leader, whether it's Inuit or a Mayan elder or Tomi or Kogi, they'll tell you that we're living in the time of prophecy. And that keeps me hopeful because I started asking around to different Indigenous leaders because I've been to a few gatherings and learning from elders. Okay, what does that mean? What does this look like from a standpoint for humanity? Does humanity make it? And one Quechua elder, Kurikindi, told me, he said that it's going to be some very dark times the next 10 years for humanity. However, humanity does survive, and the humanity that's left behind creates an earth far more beautiful than the one we could have imagined. And anytime I'm feeling down, I really just go back to what Kurikindi told me, that we'll make it. And that's what all the elders are sharing. So why Indigenous communities? They honestly understand that we aren't separate from nature. We are nature, and we share this earth with 8.7 million other species. And these species aren't below us. And I've learned that in Indigenous principles, that the red-tailed hawk is not anywhere less than myself. It's a relative. They call them their non-human kin. They're friends and they're relatives. And I think that's really beautiful, just honoring that an oak tree has these beautiful inherent properties and rights to exist, just like human beings do. We like to think we're the more superior species, but we're really not. And Indigenous communities really recognize that we're part of a healthy biosphere, we're part of this web of life, and we're no more superior to the wolf, to bears, to sharks, to trees. We are part of this web of life, and we need that ethos, we need that love of Mother Earth to lead us during these times, because right now we're extracting and destroying and abusing Mother Earth. And the Kogi, I don't know if you're familiar with the Kogi community in the Sierra Nevadas, but we're working with some of the mamos down there, and they like to say that Earth is mother and humanity is little brother. And they say right now little brother's abusing mother, and little brother needs to wake up and learn a lesson. And they are absolutely right. And
an unruly teenager is a good way to look at humanity.
Yeah.
And destructive one.
We're destructive. And I think that when people say, well, humanity sucks, and like, what's the point of humanity? And we're all parasites. I don't think that's true. I do think there are some humans that really care about Mother Earth. And I do think a lot of them are Indigenous peoples. And they have that love of the earth, and we need that to make it through these times. And their prophecies say that really there are critical energy spots around the planet, actually, that are considered like vortexes, I guess you can say, or energy centers. And they say that before the year of 2026, these elders need to go to these sacred sites and perform the pagamentos, which are payments, to apologize on behalf of humanity, and to basically activate these sacred sites so that they can communicate with each other and ascend humanity's consciousness. So I'm supporting Mendahi Bastida with that sacred sites work. to get elders to these sites. But then I'm also supporting him with the Council of Eagle and Condor to make sure that at Davos, at COP, that Indigenous voices are front and center, and that their leadership is front and center, and that world leaders and corporations are listening to them, because they're often excluded from these spaces and not at the forefront. And if they are, sometimes they feel tokenized. And so really making sure that they are listened to and respected and honored is some of the work I'm doing with Mendahi Bastida.
That was a beautiful description. Thank you so much for articulating that so eloquently. I think finally, because I know it's a big piece of your work, I would love to just unpack your kind of final third pillar, which is this idea of recognizing the rights of nature, and specifically, that's given this name, which is ecocide. And this really feels like something that still is a very unknown part of climate work and climate activism, this concept of ecocide. So could you enlighten me and our audience a little bit as to what ecocide is and why it's important and why you're passionate about furthering it?
Well, there's another statistic that's a little scary, but if you go online, you'll see that at any given day, there's like a lifetime deforestation website that I've been on a few times, and it's scary to look at it. But if you go online and check it out, we're deforesting around 115,000 acres per day. And that is not sustainable, to continue killing and destroying large swaths of forests that are sequestering carbon and providing oxygen and helping impact the rain cycle around the planet like the Amazon does. We can't just keep killing and destroying and killing and destroying. We're also killing 200 million sharks per year, and we only have 1 billion sharks left. And sharks are really the glue of our ocean's ecosystems. So why I like ecocide, it's really more of a punitive side of the law, where world leaders, I know Lula's in office now, but say Bolsonaro could be held accountable by the International Criminal Court because Brazil's a member of the ICC. And so if ecocide becomes the 5th crime against peace, then a CEO or an individual that's responsible for destroying large amounts of our Earth's ecosystems could be held criminally accountable. And we are in those times where having guardrails for humanity, having leaders or so-called leaders who like to say they're leaders kept in check so they don't continue killing and destroying our future. By criminalizing ecocide, we would have some protection as a species. So I think that even more so than the Paris Agreement, because only 6 countries are on track to reach the Paris Agreement, criminalizing ecocide is our protection as a species.
Yeah, so what I'm understanding there is it's a sort of a legal framework by which we can hold governments, but also more specifically corporations, accountable for their actions, and the sort of extractivist activities that are often part and parcel of running big companies, particularly mining, fossil fuels, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess in a way it sort of ties into this indigenous piece as well. As you kind of beautifully outlined there, a big part of the indigenous value system is giving nature an inherent value, and something that we don't have in sort of modern capitalist societies. And so this idea of recognizing the rights of nature is a sort of ode to that particular piece, I suppose.
Yeah, and actually ecocide is a separate legislative novel concept than the rights of nature. They're both very important and they both coexist. Ecocide is more, I'm going to punish one individual for like destroying a huge forest, for instance, and I'm going to hold them accountable. And I think what I like about ecocide too is it gives a face to someone behind these decisions, like a CEO. Like we think of, say, like Chevron, but then do deeper digging. Who's the person that was responsible for agreeing to destroying this territory and booting out the Waironi? So I think people then can go after a specific individual responsible for committing ecocide. Whereas the rights of nature is this other branch of legal philosophy that I also support, which is for instance, the Maori gave a river in New Zealand legal standing and recognition. think it was the first river to have rights. And there's other countries like Chile that are enshrining the rights of nature into their constitution. The Mapuche are really driving that. And this is more of like an indigenous concept that Mother Earth has rights and deserves legal standing. So they're both super important. This one's more like, I'm going to punish you like for committing ecocide, and like just like someone would commit genocide or killing someone, like a murderer. Like you're going to punish one person for this criminal act, and it should be criminal to destroy the planet. I don't think humanity really recognizes that yet, but it will be, I think, one day, hopefully soon. And then this is rights of nature. Okay, this forest has rights. This river has rights. The species has rights. So I'm doing a lot of work too with the Mexican government. We have a partnership with the Mexican government, with the Senate at the federal level, and then the Mexican government, the state of Quintana Roo, to give keystone species rights. So giving sharks, jaguars, manatees, and other critical species, mangroves, rights in Mexico.
So many powerful bits of wisdom in what you're telling me, Julian. I wonder if we could sort of weave them together somehow. I mean, I've been really inspired listening to you speak, and you have such a powerful personal story in that you've experienced, I guess, the personal loss and devastation that comes with disease and cancer, which is where we started with the loss of your father, but then also the personal loss and grief that comes with climate change and extreme weather and how that can impact our lives. As a sort of final way of trying to tie it together, how can tackling one help tackle the other? Like, what is the kind of link there, if indeed there is one at all?
I'd say that, I sometimes, to be honest, it sounds like a lot, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I do all of this? It's because I have a really strong team. So I do want to give a shout out to my team at Grounded. I've got the best team ever. I really love, like, I would not be able to do work without a team. And also, I have to say that we don't do it just as a siloed organization. We have partner organizations, so we couldn't do this without partnerships. So it might seem like a lot, but there's a lot of organizations that are working with us and a lot of great teammates. I'm more of like the strategic mind, so I have a vision and want to create, but I also like can help like with like the look and feel because I have an artistic background, so I'm a really creative mind. But you're nothing without a team, and I'd say surround yourself with people, whatever it is you're passionate about. It doesn't even have to be the climate space. I'd say that surround yourself with people that own the mission of whatever you want to do in their heart. And I'd leave it with, I have great people around me and great people in this movement and space, and could not do it without others.
I agree strongly, and we're lucky enough to have the same thing here at Earthrise. It wouldn't be possible without a very powerful team. And I'm often asked about climate grief and climate anxiety. And last year I had a chance to make a 2-part documentary about the topic. And the one kind of piece of feedback that came through very strongly from people experiencing it as a way to better get through it is community. Community is the most powerful tool when it comes to experiencing climate grief and climate anxiety. And so, that can look like friends and family, it can look like a team. We are stronger together. And indeed, as you say, this is a movement that's going to take every single one of us. So it's up to us to kind of find our place in the movement and come together to unite rather than separate.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Jack. Yeah, this was awesome.
Thank you.